Destroyer. General Marcus Holt slammed his pistol onto the briefing table so hard the glass cracked straight across. I don't want her reassigned. I don't want her transferred. I want her destroyed. Her file, her record, her future. All of it gone. Nobody in that room breathed. He grabbed the nearest colonel by the throat and drove him backward into the wall. She walked into my fort, Holt whispered, his voice shaking with something beyond rage. A girl, a nobody, and you let her stay. The colonel couldn't answer, couldn't move. 3 months later, 3 4-star generals would kneel before that same nobody, in that same fort, and Marcus Holt would watch every second of it. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Fort Bragg, because what happened next, nobody saw coming. The United States Army does not officially rank its soldiers by how much they are wanted, but Fort Bragg has its own rules. And in the fall of that particular year, every soldier, every officer, every enlisted man and woman who walked through the gates of the most legendary military installation in America knew one thing with absolute certainty. Private First Class Anna Rourke was not wanted there. She arrived on a Tuesday morning, which was already a bad sign. Tuesdays at Fort Bragg meant inspection cycles, which meant tempers, where short patience was already spent, and every sergeant on the base was looking for something to yell about. Anna stepped off the transport bus wearing a uniform that fit her perfectly, carrying a single duffel bag that wasn't overstuffed like most recruits. And she stood at the edge of the processing yard with her hands loose at her sides and her eyes completely still. She was 23 years old, 5 feet 6 inches, brown hair pulled back so tight it looked painted on, and she had the kind of face that people immediately underestimated. Not because she looked weak, but because she looked calm, dangerously, unnervingly calm, in a place where everyone else was always performing either toughness or exhaustion. Anna Rourke looked like she had already been somewhere harder than Fort Bragg, like she had already done something worse than whatever was about to happen here. The processing sergeant, a thick-necked man named Dominguez, walked down the line of arriving soldiers the way a buyer walks through a livestock auction. He stopped at each person, looked them over, moved on. When he got to Anna, he stopped longer than he stopped at anyone else. Rourke, he said, reading her name tape. Anna Rourke. Yes, Sergeant. You're in the wrong place, Rourke. She met his eyes directly, which was already a mistake in Dominguez's world. New arrivals were supposed to look at the ground, or at least slightly past his shoulder. Looking directly into a sergeant's face on day one was either a sign of serious confidence or serious stupidity. He hadn't decided which one yet with this one. This is Fort Bragg, she asked. Her voice was quiet, not soft quiet. There's a difference. Soft means apologetic. Quiet means controlled. This is Fort Bragg, he confirmed. Then I'm in the right place, Sergeant. Dominguez looked at her for 2 more full seconds. Then he moved on down the line. But he didn't forget her name. Nobody who met Anna Rourke that week forgot her name. That was part of the problem. The first real confrontation happened 6 hours after she arrived. Barracks' assignment at Fort Bragg was supposed to be straightforward. You were assigned a bunk, given a locker number, and you made your space work within whatever dimensions the Army had decided were sufficient for a human being. Anna's bunk was in the back corner of Building 7, which was the building nobody requested and everyone eventually got over. The mattress had seen better decades. The locker had a door that didn't fully close. The soldier in the bunk above hers, a broad-shouldered woman named Specialist Torres, leaned over the edge and looked down at Anna with the expression of someone who had already made up her mind. New assignment, Torres asked. Yes, Anna said. She was folding her spare uniforms with the precision of someone who had been doing it since childhood. You're replacing Vasquez, Torres said. Vasquez shipped out 2 weeks ago. Good soldier. We liked Vasquez. I'm sorry to hear she's gone, Anna said. Are you? Torres's eyes narrowed slightly. Because I heard about you, Rourke. Word travels fast. I heard General Holt tried to block your assignment. Anna set a folded shirt into the locker. She didn't answer. I heard he called your file a political favor, Torres continued. Said someone was pushing a diversity quota and you were the result. Said you had test scores that looked impressive on paper, but you'd never been anywhere real. Never done anything real. Anna closed the locker door. It swung back open because of the broken latch. She pushed it closed again more firmly, and this time it held. General Holt doesn't know me, she said. No, Torres agreed. He doesn't. But he's still a four-star general. And you're still a PFC, so the question isn't whether he's right about you. She paused. The question is what you're going to do about it. For the first time since she'd arrived, Anna looked up at Torres directly, and something passed between them in that moment. Not friendship, not yet, but something more complicated. Recognition, maybe. The way one fighter in a gymnasium sometimes recognizes something familiar in a stranger across the room. I'm going to do my job, Anna said. Torres looked at her for a long moment. Then she swung back up onto her bunk. Get some sleep, Rourke, she said. Tomorrow's going to be ugly. She had no idea how right she was. The morning PT formation started at 0530, and the temperature outside had the kind of sharp, biting edge that makes your lungs protest before your legs even get involved. Anna fell into line at the back of the formation the way she'd been directed, because new arrivals always went to the back until they'd proven their place. This was standard. This was expected. But what was not standard, and was very much not expected, was the sudden appearance of Lieutenant Colonel James Graves. Graves was the kind of officer who walked into a room and the room got smaller. Not because he was physically imposing, though he was, but because he had a voice like a door slamming in an empty building, loud in a way that you felt before you heard it. He stopped in front of the formation at exactly 0542 and looked down the line with the kind of contempt that most people reserve for traffic jams and cold food. I have been informed, he said, his voice carrying with zero effort across the entire formation, that we have a new arrival, a special arrival, someone whose file apparently required general-level review before assignment. Anna did not move, did not shift, did not blink. Rourke, Graves said, front and center. She walked forward from the back of the formation. Every pair of eyes in that yard followed her. She stopped 6 feet in front of Graves and came to attention. He looked at her the way you look at something that doesn't make sense. Private First Class Rourke, he said. I've read your file. Yes, sir, she said. Your marksmanship scores. Yes, sir. Your obstacle course times. So, yes, sir. Your tactical assessment results. Yes, sir. Graves stepped closer. He was nearly a foot taller than her, and he used that height deliberately the way tall men in positions of power often do when they want to establish that the conversation is not between equals. I want you to understand something, he said quietly now, which was worse than the loud. This is not a training ground for experiments. This is not a showcase for whatever point that someone in Washington is trying to make. The soldiers behind you have been here months, some of them years. They have earned their place on this base through sweat and blood and things I suspect you have not yet had the opportunity to experience. The formation behind Anna was absolutely silent. She could feel the weight of their attention the way you feel sunlight on your back, heavy and inescapable. Do you understand what I'm saying to you, Private? Graves asked. I understand your concerns, sir, she said. Something shifted in his face, not anger calculation. He had expected either fear or defiance. She had given him neither. My concern, he repeated slowly as if tasting the word. That's an interesting way to put it. With respect, sir, Anna said. I was assigned here through proper channels. My scores are accurate. My qualifications are documented. I intend to perform my duties to the standard required of this installation. Graves stared at her. The formation behind her held its breath. Then Graves turned and walked away without another word, which in its own way was more frightening than anything he might have said. Sergeant First Class Patricia Webb found Anna in the weapons room at 0800. The weapons room at Fort Bragg's Building 7 was not a glamorous space. It was a room full of racks and locks and the particular smell that firearms have when they've been properly maintained for a long time, oil and metal and discipline. Anna was cleaning her assigned service weapon with the methodical focus of someone who does not require reminders about why things need to be done correctly. Webb sat down across from her, uninvited, and watched her work for almost a full minute before she spoke. You handled Graves well, Webb said. I answered his questions, Anna said without looking up. That's not what I said. Webb leaned her elbows on the table. I said you handled him well. Well, there's a difference. Most soldiers, when Graves gets in their face on day 2, They either freeze up or they push back in a way that gets them punished. You did neither. You were, she paused, searching for the word precise. Anna set down the cleaning cloth and looked at Webb for the first time. Is that a warning, she asked. It's an observation, Webb said. I'm trying to figure out what you are, Rourke. I'm a soldier, Anna said, simply, without any drama attached to it. Webb made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Yeah, that's what everyone says. But I've been on this base for 11 years. I've seen soldiers come through that door who were good at the test and couldn't handle real pressure. I've seen soldiers come through who were terrible at every evaluation and turned into the most dependable people I've ever served with. Scores don't tell you what someone is. She looked directly at Anna. So I'm asking again, what are you? The room was quiet except for the distant sound of a formation running somewhere outside. Anna picked up the cleaning cloth again. I'm the person they threw away, she said. Webb said nothing. General Holt tried to block my assignment. Anna continued, her hands moving methodically. Lieutenant Colonel Graves made sure my first morning here was a public spectacle. I arrived knowing that the people responsible for my success at this installation had already decided I was going to fail. So when you ask me what I am, she looked up again, and her eyes were steady as a scope in still air. I'm the person who shows up anyway. Webb looked at her for a long time. Then she stood up. Be at the firing range at 1300, she said. I want to see something. The firing range at Fort Bragg is not designed to impress visitors. It is designed to reveal truth. You can hide a lot of things in an office or a barracks room. You can perform confidence in a morning formation. You can give measured, careful answers to a superior officer and walk away having revealed almost nothing about who you actually are. But on a firing range with a weapon in your hands and a target 200 yards away, you cannot pretend. Either the bullet goes where you told it to go or it doesn't. Either your breathing is controlled and your hands are steady and your mind is where it needs to be, or you are exposed as someone whose reputation exceeded their ability. Sergeant Webb stood to one side and watched. The range officer, a young corporal named Ekwemi, had set up standard targets at 100, 200, and 300 yards. He handed Anna her weapon with the professional neutrality of someone who had watched hundreds of soldiers take their turn and had long since stopped predicting outcomes. Anna took the weapon. She checked it in a sequence that was so practiced it looked unconscious. Magazine, chamber, sight alignment. She didn't rush any step and she didn't drag any step. She moved through the process the way a musician warms up before a performance, not as a performance itself, but as the genuine private preparation of someone who understands what they're about to do. Then she stepped to the line, and she put every round exactly where she told it to go. Not close to center, not in the scoring zone, in the center repeatedly, at 100 yards, at 200 yards, at 300 yards, with a consistency that made Corporal Ekwemi go very still at his scoring station and turn to look at Sergeant Webb with an expression that was equal parts disbelief and awe. Webb was already writing something in her notebook. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had suspected the answer and was now confirmed. But she didn't say anything. Not yet, because this was only the beginning, and Webb had been in the Army long enough to know that a perfect score on a range doesn't automatically translate to what happens when the pressure gets real, when the choices get complicated, and when the people with the most authority are actively working against you. What she had seen was potential. What she was waiting to see was character. The situation in the mess hall that evening should not have escalated the way it did. These things rarely should. But Fort Bragg had a culture, and cultures have momentum, and momentum is very hard to stop once it builds. Anna sat at the far end of a table with her tray, which was standard new arrival behavior, and also in her case, a genuine preference. She ate efficiently the way she did most things, not quickly efficiently. She didn't play with her food. She didn't stare at her phone. She ate her meal with the focused attention of someone who understood that nutrition was a performance requirement, and she watched the room with the peripheral awareness of someone who had learned somewhere, and somehow that being aware of your environment was not paranoia. It was survival. The three soldiers who sat down across from her were not subtle about their intentions. They were young mid-20s, all three of them, and they had the particular energy of people who have been watching a situation build all day and have finally decided to be the ones to address it. The one in the middle was a specialist named Garrett, and he had the square jaw and the easy confidence of someone who had grown up being told he was naturally suited for the military. Rourke, Garrett said, not a greeting, a statement of presence. Garrett, she said, she knew his name. She had been memorizing names since she arrived. That surprised him slightly. He covered it well, but not perfectly. Word is you put up some numbers on the range today, he said. I hit my targets, she said. Webb's range, he continued. Webb doesn't take people to her range for fun. She takes people she wants to evaluate. I'm aware, Anna said. She kept eating. So what's the point? Garrett asked, and now his voice shifted slightly, took on the edge of something more genuine, something less performed. You're a PFC. You've been here 36 hours. Graves already has you on his list. Holt doesn't want you here. And yet here you are shooting perfect scores on Webb's range, looking at everybody like you're already deciding what to do with us. Anna set down her fork. She looked at Garrett directly. What do you want to know? She asked. He blinked. This was also not the response he had prepared for. What? You came over here with a question, she said. Ask it, straight. Garrett glanced at the soldiers on either side of him. They had no guidance to offer. He looked back at Anna. Who are you? He asked. And now stripped of all the posturing, it was just a genuine question from a young soldier who had encountered something he didn't have a category for. Where did you come from? What are you doing here? Because people don't get their files reviewed by a 4-star general and then just show up as a PFC. That's not how this works. So who are you really? The mess hall was loud around them. Hundreds of soldiers eating, talking, moving. But their particular corner had gone quiet in that way that small spaces do when the people in them recognize that something real is happening. Anna looked at Garrett for a long moment. Then she picked up her fork and went back to eating. I'm the new girl, she said quietly. That's all you need to know for now. Garrett stared at her, then without quite knowing why he nodded, and he got up and left. The call came through to General Holt's office at 2100. He was still at his desk because General Marcus Holt was the kind of man who worked late, not because the work required it, but because working late was a statement. A reminder to anyone who might be keeping track that he was always the last one standing, always the one who cared more, always the one who took his responsibilities more seriously than the people below him. The voice on the phone was familiar, and it was not a voice that called casually. Marcus, said General William Reese, the man who currently occupied the position of Army Chief of Staff, which placed him in the top tier of the most powerful military hierarchy in the United States. I'm calling about Private Rourke. Holt felt something cold settle in his stomach. Sir, her assignment was official, Reese said. I want to make sure you understand that. With respect, sir, I have concerns about Marcus. The voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. I'm not asking about your concerns. I'm telling you that her assignment was official. I'm telling you that her file was reviewed at a level that goes beyond your installation. And I'm telling you that whatever your personal reservations are, you will give Private Rourke the same opportunity you give every soldier who arrives at Fort Bragg through proper channels. Holt's jaw was tight. And if she fails to meet the standard, then she fails, Reese said simply. Let her prove herself, or let her fail. But you will not put your hand on the scale, Marcus. Do you understand me? A long pause. Yes, sir, Holt said. The call ended. Holt set down the phone and looked at the wall for a moment. I was a man who had spent 40 years in the Army and who believed with genuine, unironic certainty that he had always been right about the important things. He believed in hierarchy. He believed in tradition. He believed that some positions existed because certain people had earned them through certain experiences, and that sentimentality about opportunity and fairness had no place in the hard calculus of military effectiveness. He believed he was right about Anna Rourke. He just needed her to prove him right. He pulled her file back across the desk. He read it again from the beginning. And somewhere in the reading, somewhere in the careful review of scores and evaluations and letters of recommendation that he had already dismissed but now found himself reading more carefully somewhere in there, the cold feeling in his stomach grew slightly colder. Because there was something in this file, something that didn't fit the narrative he had already constructed, something that asked a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. He closed the file. He told himself it didn't matter, but it was the kind of thing that once noticed could not be unnoticed. At 2200, Anna Rourke sat on the edge of her bunk and with her back to the wall and her hands in her lap. Torres was not asleep above her. Torres was quiet, but not asleep quiet. The kind of quiet that means someone is listening. You don't have to be the last person awake, Torres said eventually from above. I know, Anna said. You should sleep, Torres said. I will. A pause. Garrett talked to me after dinner, Torres said. He said you told him you were just the new girl. That's what I said, Anna agreed. He didn't believe you. Good, Anna said quietly. He shouldn't. Torres was silent for a moment. Then, what's in your file, Rourke? What did Holt see that made him try to pull your assignment? Something he wasn't ready to understand yet, Anna said. And what's that? Anna lay back on her bunk and looked at the springs above her. That the thing he's been afraid of for his entire career, she said slowly, isn't actually a threat. It's a mirror. The room was quiet. Go to sleep, Torres, Anna said, and she closed her eyes. And in the dark of Building 7 on the base where she wasn't wanted, in the unit where everyone was watching to see her fail, Private First Class Anna Rourke breathed slowly and evenly and thought about everything she had seen today and everything she had done and everything that was still coming. She did not feel afraid. So she felt ready, and that in itself was the thing that would eventually change everything. Because readiness, the genuine kind, the kind that comes not from arrogance, but from having already been broken and rebuilt in the fire of something real. Genuine readiness is the one thing that no amount of authority or institutional resistance or deliberate obstruction can touch. You can deny a soldier a position. You can try to block an assignment. You can stand in front of a formation and make a new arrival into a spectacle. You can sit in your office at 2100 with a file on your desk and try to find the reason you were right about someone you've never spoken to. But you cannot undo what someone has already survived. And Anna Rourke had already survived something that most of the people at Fort Bragg, most of the people who had spent their careers collecting rank and reputation, and the warm comfort of being on the approved side of every question, had never had to face. She had survived being the person that the institution decided before she ever walked through the door was not supposed to be there. She had survived it before this. She would survive it again here. And by the time she was done, by the time the story that began in a mess hall with 3 young soldiers at a table and a general on a phone and a file that asked a question nobody wanted answered, reached its end, there would be 3 4-star generals standing in a room at Fort Bragg, on their knees. Not because they were ordered to, not because protocol required it, but because in the end, you cannot stand up straight in the presence of something that has earned more than you ever had the courage to offer. That moment was still coming, but it started here, in a bunk in Building 7, with a soldier who closed her eyes and breathed evenly and refused to be afraid of anything that hadn't earned her fear yet. Private First Class Anna Rourke, the girl they didn't want, the legend they couldn't stop. The morning after Anna Rourke closed her eyes in Building 7, Fort Bragg did not wake up gently. It never did. 0500 came the way it always came, hard, loud, and without apology. But this particular morning had something extra in it, a tension that moved through the base like a current through water, invisible everywhere. You couldn't point to it directly, but you could feel it in the way soldiers looked at each other across the yard, in the way voices dropped when certain names were mentioned, in the way Sergeant First Class Patricia Webb stood outside Building 7 at 0512 with a coffee she wasn't drinking and a look on her face that said she already knew something the rest of the base didn't. Torres climbed down from her bunk at 0450 and found Anna already dressed, already sitting, already awake in the way that suggested she had never quite been fully asleep to begin with. You didn't sleep, Torres said. It wasn't a question. I slept enough, Anna said. How much is enough? Enough to be ready, Anna said. That's all sleep is for. Torres looked at her for a moment. There was something she wanted to say. You could see it moving behind her eyes, working toward the surface. But Torres was a soldier who had learned the hard way on 3 different deployments that some conversations needed to wait for the right moment. So she pulled on her jacket and said nothing, and both women walked out into the cold together into a morning that was already moving faster than anyone was ready for. What nobody in Building 7 knew yet was that General Holt had made a phone call at 0200. He had not slept either. But his wakefulness was a different kind. Not the clean, focused wakefulness of a soldier preparing. The restless, grinding wakefulness of a man who had been told no by someone above him and was now looking for a door that wasn't locked. Holt was very good at finding unlocked doors. It was one of the skills that had carried him through 40 years of military service and straight to 4 stars on his collar. He understood institutional systems the way a locksmith understands tumblers. You didn't break them. You found the combination. At 0 to 100, he found his combination. He called Major Derek Sloan. Sloan was the kind of officer that every large institution produces and nobody officially acknowledges. He was competent enough to be useful and flexible enough to be dangerous. He had been passed over for promotion twice and had responded to both rejections, not with the dignified acceptance that the Army preferred, and not with the visible bitterness that would have gotten him reassigned, but with a cold, quiet, completely invisible resentment that he had learned to weaponize with surgical precision. Holt had used Sloan before. Sloan had never said no. "I need the qualification trials moved up," Holt said without greeting, without preamble. "Tomorrow morning, full combat scenario. I want every new arrival in that cycle tested." Sloan was quiet for a moment. "The standard timeline is 30 days, sir. New arrivals are supposed to—" "I know the standard timeline, Major," Holt said. "I'm asking you to adjust it." Another pause. Shorter this time. 30 days becomes 24 hours, Sloan said. "Correct." "That will be difficult for most of them, sir. They've only been on base." "That," Holt said, "is the point." The call ended, and somewhere in Building 7, Anna Rourke slept what sleep she could and told herself it was enough. She had no idea what was already in motion. By 0600, the entire processing group had been assembled in the main briefing room and told that qualification trials were being moved. Immediately. Today, the standard explanation administrative scheduling adjustment was delivered by a corporal who read it off a card and had clearly been given nothing else to say. Around Anna, the other new arrivals reacted with the predictable mixture of panic disbelief and frantic whispered strategy. Soldiers who had been planning to spend the next 4 weeks preparing were suddenly doing math in their heads, calculating whether 30 days of preparation could be compressed into the hours they had before the trials began. Garrett found Anna in the crowd. He pushed through to stand next to her and leaned down slightly to speak near her ear. "This isn't normal," he said. "I've been through 2 other processing cycles at 2 other installations. This isn't how it works." "I know," Anna said. "They moved it up for you," Garrett said. And his voice was not accusing. It was something more complicated than that, almost protective. "They want you to fail before you have time to be ready." Anna looked straight ahead at the corporal who was still reading from his card. "Then I need to be ready already," she said. Garrett stared at her. "Are you?" he asked. She didn't answer, which was in its own way the answer. The qualification trials at Fort Bragg were structured in 3 stages, and the structure was deliberate. The first stage was physical, a timed obstacle course, followed by a 4-mile run under load designed to establish baseline fitness, under genuine fatigue rather than the fresh body performances that recruits could manage on a well-rested morning. The second stage was technical, weapons qualification, communication systems operation, and a tactical decision-making assessment that put soldiers in simulated command scenarios and evaluated not just their choices, but the speed and confidence with which they made them. The third stage was the one that broke people, not because it was physically harder than the first or technically more demanding than the second, but because it was both simultaneously layered over each other with a time pressure that didn't allow you to excel at one thing at a time. You had to excel at everything at once while exhausted while being evaluated, while knowing that the margin for error was somewhere between very small and non-existent. The trials were designed to simulate real conditions, and real conditions, as any combat veteran will tell you, are not waiting for you to be rested. Major Sloan stood at the edge of the course at 0700 with a clipboard and the expression of a man who already knew how the day was going to end. He watched the new arrivals assemble at the start line with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had set something in motion and was now simply waiting to watch it resolve. He found Anna in the group. He watched her for a long moment. She was stretching, not the performative stretching of someone who wants to be seen preparing. The focused, specific, deliberate stretching of someone who knows exactly which muscle groups are going to be tested and is addressing each one in sequence. Sloan noticed this. He made a small note on his clipboard. Not a good note, a concern note. The kind of note a man makes when the outcome he was banking on starts to look slightly less certain. Sergeant Webb appeared at Sloan's elbow. Major, she said. Sloan didn't look at her. Sergeant. This timing is irregular, Webb said. There was nothing in her voice that could be called insubordination. She was too experienced for that. But there was something in it that was the precise temperature of a woman who was recording this conversation in her memory with perfect fidelity. Scheduling adjustment, Sloan said. Administrative. Right, Webb said. She looked at the start line, at Anna, then back at Sloan. And if a soldier performs exceptionally under the adjusted timeline, Sloan finally looked at her. Then she performs exceptionally, he said. The results stand regardless. Webb held his gaze for exactly 1 second longer than was comfortable. Good, she said, and walked away. Sloan watched her go, then he looked back at Anna. He told himself he wasn't worried. He told himself this loudly in the back of his mind, which was usually what it meant when a man was worried. The horn sounded at 07:15, and Anna Rourke moved. Not fast, not with the explosive everything-at-once burst that some soldiers used at the start of a timed course because they had been trained to believe that the beginning set the tone. Anna moved efficiently, economically, like someone who understood that a qualification trial was not a sprint, it was a management problem. You had a fixed amount of energy, a fixed amount of time, and a fixed set of requirements, and the soldier who won was not necessarily the one who hit the first station the fastest. It was the one who arrived at the last station with enough left to perform. The obstacle course had 12 stations. Anna cleared the first 3 in the middle of the pack, not at the front, not at the back. Precisely in the middle, which was exactly where she had calculated she needed to be in order to have what she needed for the stations that came later. Garrett was ahead of her. He was a natural athlete, long-limbed and powerful, and he hit the early obstacles with the kind of confident aggression that looks very impressive from the outside and burns fuel at a rate that creates serious problems by Station 9. Anna watched him not in the way of someone who was competing with him, but in the way of someone who was cataloging information that might be useful later. At Station 4, the wall climb, something happened that nobody was quite expecting. Specialist Rivera, a broad-shouldered soldier from Texas who had been near the front of the pack since the horn hit the wall wrong. Not badly wrong, not dangerously wrong, but wrong enough that his grip slipped at the top and he came down on the wrong side at an angle that put his left ankle in a position it was not designed to tolerate. He didn't cry out. He hit the ground and was back on his feet in under 3 seconds because Rivera was the kind of soldier who treated pain as a communication that could be acknowledged and then set aside. But the ankle was already swelling inside his boot, and everyone who had seen the landing knew it. Rivera kept moving. Anna, coming up behind him, saw him compensating on the next station. She saw the slight imbalance, the way his left side was working harder than his right to compensate for something that hurt, but wasn't being admitted. She pulled even with him. Rivera, she said without slowing down. I'm fine, he said immediately. Soldiers always said this immediately. I know, she said. Left side. He glanced at her. What? Favor your left side on the rope stations, she said. It looks stronger right now. Don't fight what your body is already doing. She moved past him without waiting for a response. Rivera stared after her for half a second, then he adjusted, and the adjustment worked. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough that he finished the course without the ankle failing completely, which was what would have happened if he had kept fighting the compensation the way he had been. Sloan, watching from the edge, made another note on his clipboard. This one was harder to categorize. At Station 7, the cargo net, Anna hit a problem that was not physical. The cargo net at Fort Bragg's qualification course was old, not dangerously old, but old enough that the ropes had a particular quality of looseness that made the whole structure behave differently than a newer net would. A newer net was taut and predictable. This one had give in unexpected places, which meant that your grip placement had to account for movement you couldn't fully anticipate. Most soldiers solved this by gripping harder, which was the instinctive response to unpredictability, and also the wrong one because gripping harder on a loose net transferred the instability to your whole body instead of isolating it to your hands. Anna gripped softer, not loosely, softer, with enough give in her own hands to absorb the movement of the net rather than fighting it. She moved up the net with the fluid, adaptable motion of someone who had encountered unstable surfaces before and had really learned, not just been told that the correct response to unpredictable ground was not rigidity. It was controlled flexibility. She was at the top of the net before the soldiers who had hit it ahead of her were halfway up. In the crowd of observers, because qualification trials at Fort Bragg always drew observers, a murmur moved through the group. The kind of murmur that happens when something occurs that people recognize as significant even before they have fully processed why. Sergeant Webb, standing to one side, said nothing, but she stopped writing in her notebook. She just watched. The 4-mile run under load came after the obstacle course, and this was where most soldiers who had burned too hot on the course paid the price. The load was 42 pounds standard combat kit, and the course was not flat. It had two significant elevation changes that the Army described in the training manual as moderate, and that every soldier who had run it described as something considerably less polite than moderate. The elevation changes came at mile 2 and mile 3, which was deliberate because putting the hardest parts in the middle meant you hit them when your early energy was gone and your finishing energy wasn't available yet. You had to run them on nothing but will and whatever structural efficiency you had managed to preserve from the first half. Anna ran mile 1 in 8 minutes and 40 seconds. This was not remarkable. Mile 2, including the first elevation change, she ran in 9 minutes and 12 seconds. Also not remarkable, slightly slower, which was expected and correct. But mile 3, with the second elevation change and the approach to the final stretch, Anna ran in 8 minutes and 51 seconds. She had gotten faster on the hardest mile. Garrett, who finished 12 seconds behind her overall, stood at the finish line breathing hard and staring at her with his hands on his knees and an expression on his face that was somewhere between exhausted admiration and the particular discomfort of someone who has just had a fundamental assumption quietly dismantled. How, he said, just the one word. Anna was breathing hard too. She wasn't invulnerable. She wasn't a machine. Her face was flushed and her hands were shaking slightly with the systemic exhaustion that 42 pounds over 4 miles produces in a human body, regardless of how well trained it is. But she was standing fully upright, which is harder than it sounds when you want very badly to bend over and put your hands on your knees the way Garrett was doing. Mile 3 is where everyone else slows down, she said. So mile 3 is where you speed up. Garrett looked at her. That's insane, he said. That's math, she said. And then the second stage began. The weapons qualification portion of the trial went the way anyone who had watched Anna on Webb's range the day before could have predicted, which meant it went better than Major Sloan's clipboard had accounted for. She was every distance, precise in a way that was almost pedagogical. The kind of precision that doesn't just demonstrate competence, but teaches everyone watching something about what competence actually looks like when it's fully realized. The communications systems component was where Sloan had expected to find the gap. Most soldiers who excelled in physical and marksmanship categories showed their limitations in technical systems operation, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they had specialized their preparation and the systems were genuinely complex. Sloan had seen decorated athletes struggle with radio protocols. He had seen exceptional marksmen blank on encryption procedures. It was not unusual. It was not shameful. It was simply the nature of specialization. Anna did not struggle. She moved through the communications assessment with the same efficient, unhurried competence she brought to everything else. Not because she had been specifically trained on these systems, though she had, but because she had a mind that approached new technical information the way a good mechanic approaches an unfamiliar engine, not with confusion, with curiosity, with the systematic, patient inquiry of someone who understood that everything complex is simply a collection of simpler things assembled in a particular order, and that the order, once understood, makes the complexity manageable. When the assessor asked her to explain her process on the encryption protocol, she explained it in 3 sentences. The assessor wrote something on his form. Then he looked at Sloan. Sloan did not meet his eyes. The tactical decision-making assessment was the one that Sloan had been quietly most confident about. Not because Anna would obviously fail it, he had given up on obviously by station 4 of the obstacle course, but because the scenario was designed by his team and he had ensured that it included specific situational variables that tended to expose limitations in soldiers who had strong individual skills but weaker instincts for group dynamics and command-level thinking. The scenario placed the soldier in a simulated command position with incomplete information time pressure in a series of subordinate situations that required the solver to make resource allocation decisions that were genuinely difficult. There was no clean answer. There was no perfect outcome. The assessment was measuring not whether you solved the problem perfectly, but how you thought about it, how you communicated under pressure, how you held the structure of a complex situation in your mind while simultaneously managing the individuals within it. Anna sat down at the assessment station at 1400. She stood up at 1447, the assessor, a veteran master sergeant named Colton, who had been running tactical assessments for 9 years and had the flat, unreadable affect of someone who had decided long ago that being impressed was a luxury he couldn't afford on duty, looked at her completed scenario evaluation for a long time. Then he looked at her. "Walk me through your decision at the 7-minute mark," he said. The communications blackout. Anna sat back down. "I had 3 options," she said. "Maintain the original plan with incomplete information, adapt the plan based on what I could reasonably infer from the available data, or call for a hold and wait for communications to restore. Each option had a cost." "And you chose," Colton said. "I adapted," Anna said, "not because it was the safest option. It wasn't. But a hold puts every unit in a static position during active contact, which is more dangerous than moving on incomplete information if you understand how to move conservatively. And maintaining the original plan when the ground truth has almost certainly shifted is how you turn a difficult situation into a catastrophic one." Colton looked at his assessment sheet. He made a notation. "That's the reasoning of an officer," he said. His voice was entirely flat, entirely neutral. "I'm a PFC," Anna said. "I know what you are," Colton said. And for a moment, just a moment, something moved through his professional neutrality. Not sentiment, not warmth, something more precise than either of those. Recognition. "I know exactly what you are, Private." He handed the completed assessment form to the runner standing by the door. "Take this to General Holt's office," he said, "directly. Not to the processing desk. Directly." The runner looked slightly uncertain. This was not standard procedure. "Directly," Colton repeated, with a finality that ended the conversation. The runner left. Sloan, standing outside the assessment room, watched the runner pass with the form and felt something in his chest tighten with a very specific, very unpleasant quality. He had set this day in motion at 0200. He had adjusted the timeline. He had structured the trial. He had done everything that could be done through the channels available to him without crossing the lines that would make this official and documentable and therefore dangerous. And it had not been enough. He pulled out his phone. He stared at it for a moment. Then he made a call. "She passed everything," he said when the line connected. "All 3 stages. Clean." The silence on the other end had a particular quality, a long pause. Then General Holt's voice, very quiet. Everything, sir, the obstacle course, the run, the weapons qualification, the communications assessment, the tactical scenario, all of it." Another pause, longer. "How," Holt said, and in that one word buried under 4 decades of command authority and institutional certainty was something that Sloan had never heard in General Marcus Holt's voice before. Genuine confusion. Not the confusion of a man who has encountered a bureaucratic obstacle. The confusion of a man who has encountered something that does not fit the shape of the world as he understands it. A fact that refuses to resolve into any of the categories his experience has given him. "Sir," Sloan said carefully, "her scores across all 3 stages are—" He paused, looking at the numbers in front of him. "They're in the top 3% of all qualifying soldiers processed at this installation in the last 7 years. Silence. "That can't be accurate," Holt said. "It's accurate, sir." A very long silence. "Find something," Holt said finally, quietly. "There is always something. Find it." The call ended. No. Sloan stood in the hallway outside the assessment room and looked at the numbers in front of him and understood with the slow, uncomfortable clarity of a man who has committed himself to a particular outcome and is watching it become impossible that there might not be something to find, that there might be nothing. That the narrative he and Holt had been writing since Anna Rourke's file arrived, the narrative in which the ending was already decided before the story began, might be the wrong narrative entirely. He didn't act on this understanding. Not yet. Men like Sloan rarely do immediately. They needed time to recalibrate to find the new version of the story that still ended where they needed it to end. But the understanding was there, in the hallway, growing. Webb found Anna in the equipment return area at 1600. Anna was checking in her trial kit with the same methodical precision she brought to every physical task, and she was not celebrating, which Webb noted. Some soldiers, after a performance like today's, had to work hard to contain their visible satisfaction. Anna contained it with zero apparent effort, which meant either that she was extraordinarily controlled or that she genuinely did not experience today as a victory. Webb suspected the latter. "Colton, talk to me," Webb said, walking alongside Anna toward the exit. "Okay," Anna said. "He doesn't talk to people about assessment results," Webb said. "He processes the paperwork and goes home. He's been doing this for 9 years, and I have never seen him seek out a second conversation with an assessed soldier." Anna was quiet. "He said," Webb continued, "and I'm quoting him exactly because Colton says things exactly once, and I want you to hear it exactly the way he said it. He said, 'Webb, that woman is either going to save this army or the army is going to destroy her trying to stop her.'" Anna stopped walking. For a moment, just a moment, something moved across her face. Not pride, not relief, something more complicated and more private than either of those. Something that looked to Webb, who had been watching people long enough to read the ones who tried not to be readable, like recognition. Like someone who had been told a truth about themselves that they had known for a very long time, but had never heard said out loud before. Then it was gone. "What do you think?" Anna asked. Her voice was steady. Webb looked at her. "I think," Webb said slowly, "that the answer to that question depends on what you do next. Not on what your scores say, not on what Colton says, not on what Holt does or doesn't do next." She paused. "It depends on whether when they come at you again, and they will come at you again, work harder next time you remember that you are not here to prove something to them." Anna looked at her. "Then why am I here?" "You tell me," Webb said. A beat of silence. Anna looked away, toward the base, toward the 1,000 invisible mechanisms of an institution that had been in motion since long before she arrived and would keep moving long after she was gone, with or without her grinding through its own logic, with the enormous impersonal momentum of something that has never had to justify itself to anyone smaller than itself. "I'm here," Anna said quietly, "because the person who taught me everything I know asked me to be, and because he's gone, and because if I leave, then everything he gave me leaves with me." She paused. "I can't let that happen." Webb was very quiet. "Who taught you?" she asked. Anna looked at her, and the name she said made Sergeant First Class Patricia Webb, 11-year veteran, the most unshakable person on the base, go very still. In a way, she had not gone still in a very long time. Because the name Anna said was a name that Webb knew, a name that changed every assumption Webb had made about who this woman was and where she had come from, and why her file had landed on General Holt's desk in a way that required general-level review. A name that explained why, despite everything, despite Holt and Graves and Sloan and all the machinery of institutional resistance, Anna Rourke was still here, still standing, still refusing to fail. "Tell me everything," Webb said, and her voice, for the first time since Anna had known her, was not the voice of a sergeant evaluating a soldier. It was the voice of a woman who had just understood something important, something that was going to matter, very soon. Anna looked at her for a long moment, and then she started talking. The name Anna said was Colonel James Rourke. Webb heard it and stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds. Not because the name was unfamiliar. Exactly the opposite. Colonel James Rourke was one of those names that people in the United States Army said the way civilians said the names of presidents or astronauts, with a particular weight, a particular reverence, the kind that accumulates around a person not through self-promotion, but through the quiet, undeniable gravity of what they actually did. Colonel James Rourke had served 31 years. He had been in places the Army didn't put on official maps. He had made decisions under conditions that most soldiers never encountered and wouldn't survive if they did. He had trained people who went on to become the best versions of themselves in situations that required everything they had. And he had died 14 months ago, quietly, without ceremony, in a hospital room in Virginia from injuries that the official record described in language so clinical, it bore no resemblance to the actual human cost of what had happened to him in the field. Webb knew this because she had attended the memorial. She had stood in the back of a room full of people whose lives James Rourke had shaped, and she had listened to 3 different generals speak about a man they all described as irreplaceable. And she had thought the way you think about things at memorials when you're being honest with yourself, that irreplaceable was a word people used when they didn't have the courage to say they failed to protect someone. How was your father? Webb said. It was not a question. He was my father, Anna confirmed. Webb turned to look at her fully. The equipment return area was empty now. The day's processing had concluded, and the base had moved into its evening rhythm, that particular quality of controlled winding down that military installations have in the hours before dark. They were alone. Your file, Webb said slowly, working through it. Your file came through with a name change. Rourke is my mother's name, Anna said. I took it legally 2 years ago, before I enlisted. Why? Anna looked at her steadily. Because I needed to know, she said, that whatever I built here, I built it on my own. Not on his name, not on what people owed him, not on the doors that open automatically when someone recognizes the name of a man they respect. She paused. He taught me that. He said, Anna, the only thing worse than failing to earn your place is having your place handed to you. Because then you never really know if you could have gotten there yourself. Webb was very quiet for a moment. He knew you were going to enlist, Webb said. He asked me not to, Anna said. And for the first time since Webb had known her all of 48 hours, but 48 hours that had contained more information than most months, something cracked slightly in Anna's voice. Not broke. Cracked. The way a foundation cracks under stress. Still holding, but visibly strained. He spent 31 years in the Army, and he asked me not to follow him in. He said the Army wasn't ready for what I was. Webb absorbed this. What did he mean by that? She asked. Anna looked away. He meant, she said carefully, that the people at the top of this institution have spent so long protecting a particular version of it that they have forgotten what the institution is actually for. He meant that walking into Fort Bragg as his daughter would protect me temporarily and destroy me permanently, because I would never be seen as anything but the general's daughter. And the general's daughter, however capable, however trained, is always a political statement rather than a soldier. She looked back at Webb, and walking in without his name, I become the thing they can't categorize, the thing they don't have a folder for, and that terrifies them more than anything with a familiar label. Webb was quiet for a long moment. Holt doesn't know, she said. No, Anna said. Nobody on this base knows. You're the first person I've told. Why me? Webb asked. And it was a genuine question, not a formality. Anna almost smiled, almost. Because Colton told you I was either going to save this Army or the Army was going to destroy me trying. And you're the only person on this base who came to find me after hearing that and asked which one I thought it was going to be. She paused. Everyone else is waiting to see. You're the only one who wanted to know what I thought. Webb looked at her for a long time, then she said, get some sleep. Private, tomorrow's is going to be worse than today. Anna nodded. She started to walk away. Rourke, Webb said. She turned. Your father was a good man, Webb said. I want you to know that I know that. Not as a courtesy, as a fact. Anna held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she walked away into the evening. And Webb stood in the empty equipment return area and thought about Colonel James Rourke and about a daughter who had taken her mother's name and walked into the most hostile possible environment without a single piece of armor, except the training her father had given her. And she thought about what that took, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not sentiment, not the easy warmth of a good story, but something harder and colder and more serious than that. Something that felt like the beginning of a commitment. She pulled out her phone. She had a call to make. At 0800 the next morning, General Holt received 3 things simultaneously that he was not prepared for. The first was the official qualification results for the entire new arrival processing group delivered by the processing office in the standard format, which showed Anna Rourke's scores in the column that listed results numerically and therefore did not allow for the kind of editorial framing that might have softened the impact. The numbers were simply the numbers. They sat on the page and refused to be anything other than what they were. The second was a memo from the Army Inspector General's office, not addressed to Holt but copied to him, which was in some ways worse, requesting documentation on the scheduling adjustment that had moved qualification trials from the standard 30-day timeline to a 24-hour timeline for the current processing group. The memo used the word irregular twice and the phrase potential procedural violation once, and it was written in the precise, bloodless language of institutional oversight that is specifically designed to be impossible to dismiss without generating more documentation. The third was a visit from Brigadier General Sandra Okafor. Okafor commanded the Army's Human Capital and Talent Management Division, which was a title that sounded administrative and was in practice one of the most consequential positions in the service because it controlled the flow of people through the institution. She had flown in from the Pentagon. She had not called ahead. She walked into Holt's office at 0800 wearing her dress uniform and the expression of a woman who had been in enough rooms with enough powerful men to have long since stopped being impressed by any of them. "Marcus," she said. Holt stood, reflex. Okafor was 2 stars below him in rank, and he stood for her anyway, which told you something about the kind of authority she carried that wasn't visible on her collar. "Sandra," he said, "I wasn't informed of a visit." "No," she agreed pleasantly. "You weren't." She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited, which she had the standing to do, and which she did with the comfortable ease of someone who understood that the real hierarchy of any room is rarely the official one. "I want to talk to you about a soldier." Holt's jaw tightened. "Private Rourke." "Private Rourke," Okafor confirmed. She folded her hands on her knee. "Tell me your concern, Marcus, your real concern. Not the administrative version, the real one." He looked at her. He considered his options, which was something Holt always did before speaking, a habit that had kept him out of trouble for 4 decades. Then he said, "My concern is precedent. My concern is that this installation has a standard for the people who serve here, and that standard is maintained through a consistent, rigorous application of requirements that do not adjust based on political pressure or institutional optics. My concern is that Private Rourke's assignment here was driven by considerations that had nothing to do with her qualifications." Okafor listened to this with her head slightly tilted the way people listen when they are not waiting for a pause so they can speak, but are actually hearing every word. "And now that you've seen her qualifications," Okafor said, "now that the scores are on your desk." Holt was quiet. "The scores could reflect a single exceptional performance," he said, "under controlled conditions. The qualification trial that your office moved up to 24 hours, Okafor said, evenly, without accusation, just fact." Holt said nothing. "Marcus," Okafor leaned forward slightly, "I've known you for 22 years. I know you are not a cruel man. I know your concern about standards is genuine. But I need you to hear what I'm about to say, and I need you to hear it from me directly, rather than from a formal process that is already in motion." She paused. "That soldier's father spent 31 years protecting this institution. He died in service to it. And his daughter came here without his name, without his connections, without any of the advantages available to her. And she sat down in your qualification trial on 24 hours notice and produced scores in the top 3% of everyone who has ever been assessed at this installation." Another pause. "What you do with that information is going to define something, Marcus. I want you to understand what it's going to define." The office was very quiet. Holt looked at the qualification results on his desk. He looked at them for a long time. "Who is she?" he said finally. "Not the administrative version of the question, the real one." "She's a soldier," Okafor said. "She's exactly what she appears to be." Holt sat back in his chair. Something moved across his face, not capitulation, not yet, because men like Holt don't capitulate. They recalibrate, but something that looked like the beginning of a question he hadn't known he was going to ask himself. "Give me time," he said. "How much?" Okafor asked. He looked at her. "A week," he said. Okafor stood. "You have a week." She moved toward the door, then she stopped. "Marcus, her father asked her not to enlist. Did you know that?" He looked up sharply. "He told her the army wasn't ready for her," Okafor said. "She came anyway. Think about what that means." She walked out. Holt sat alone in his office with the qualification results on his desk and the question Okafor had left in the room, and he thought about Colonel James Rourke, whose memorial he had attended 14 months ago, whose service he had respected even when their professional paths had diverged, whose voice he could still hear in the particular way that voices of the genuinely consequential stay with you long after the person is gone. I thought about a daughter who had walked into Fort Bragg wearing her mother's name. He thought about what that cost. And somewhere in the thinking, very quietly, the first hairline fracture appeared in the certainty he had carried into that conference room 3 days ago, when he threw a recruitment file across the room and told the people in it to burn her orders. He didn't act on it yet, but it was there. Across the base in the middle of a training evolution, that Graves had personally designed with the specific intention of stress testing new arrivals under real team pressure. Anna Rourke was having what should have been the worst morning of her week. Graves had assembled a mixed group new arrivals integrated with experienced soldiers for a joint tactical exercise. The scenario was urban search and rescue combined with a simulated hostile contact response. Two teams, competing objectives, time limit of 90 minutes. The exercise was graded not just on outcome, but on decision-making process, team integration, and the ability of individuals to perform under the pressure of being evaluated by people who were simultaneously trying to beat them. Graves had put Anna on the team with the least experienced leadership. This was not accidental. The team leader was a young corporal named Whitfield, who was competent, earnest, and completely overwhelmed by the gap between the authority he had been given and the actual complexity of what was being asked of him. He stood at the mission brief timeline, and the look of someone who was doing math and kept getting the wrong answer. The experienced soldiers on the team, two of them veterans of multiple deployments, were watching him with the particular patience of people who had seen young leaders struggle before and had developed a professional tolerance for the interval between assumption of command and actual competence. Anna was quiet during the briefing. She listened. She watched. She did not offer her opinion because nobody had asked for it, and because there were already enough variables in Whitfield's equation without adding the complexity of a new arrival who had spent one day on base deciding she knew better than the designated leader. But at the 3-minute mark, when Whitfield's timeline collapsed because he hadn't accounted for the transit time between the first and second objectives, Anna spoke. "Corporal," she said quietly. He looked at her. Something in his face said he knew what was coming and was simultaneously relieved and defensive about it. "The transit between Alpha and Bravo eats 14 minutes under load," she said. "That leaves you 76 minutes for two objectives that each need 35 at minimum." Whitfield looked at his map. His jaw tightened. "So we prioritize Alpha," he said. It was halfway between a decision and a question. "That depends," Anna said, "on which objective has the higher strategic value and which one degrades faster if we delay." She paused. "Bravo degrades. The simulated casualty at Bravo has a time-sensitive condition. Alpha is a fixed asset. It'll be there whether we get to it at minute 20 or minute 60. Whitfield stared at his map. The two veteran soldiers were watching Anna now. "Bravo first," Whitfield said. This time it was a decision, clear, no question attached. "Bravo first," Anna agreed. One of the veterans, a staff sergeant named Morrison, who had said nothing since the briefing began, leaned slightly toward the other veteran and said something too quiet for anyone else to hear. The other veteran nodded once. They moved out. The exercise ran for 83 minutes. Whitfield's team completed both objectives. They were not perfect. The hostile contact response in the third phase cost them time they didn't have in reserve and required a creative solution from Morrison that wasn't in the original plan, but they completed both objectives within the graded parameters, which put them ahead of the other team by a margin that the exercise evaluator, a captain named Torres Reyes, was not expecting. Graves was watching from the observation point. I had expected a clean demonstration of the gap between experienced and inexperienced soldiers under pressure. He had expected to watch Whitfield's team unravel in the middle phases when the plan met reality and stopped working. He had expected specifically to watch Anna Rourke fail to integrate, to either take over inappropriately and alienate the team, or to stay quiet and watch things fall apart around her. Instead, he had watched something considerably more complicated. He had watched a new arrival walk a team leader through a planning correction without taking the decision away from him. He had watched her execute her own assigned role without overstepping. He had watched her make one critical intervention in the third phase during the hostile contact response, when the plan stopped working and Morrison was improvising where she provided cover and positioning that made Morrison's improvisation viable without being asked, without announcing herself, without anyone needing to direct her to the place she needed to be. She had seen what was needed, and she had done it. That was all, and somehow that was everything. Graves walked down from the observation point after the after-action review and found Torres Reyes completing her evaluation forms. "Her grades," he said. Torres Reyes looked up. She held his gaze for a moment. She was not a woman who found Graves easy to look at directly because Graves was the kind of officer who made people feel that looking at him was a claim they needed to have earned, and then she looked back at her forms. Exceptional, she said. Define exceptional, he said. Torres Reyes set down her pen. Sir, I've been evaluating tactical exercises for 6 years. Individual performance at the level Private Rourke demonstrated today in terms of situational awareness, team integration, and adaptive response. I've seen it in soldiers with 2, 3 combat deployments. I have not seen it in a soldier on day 3 of arrival processing. She paused. That's my definition of exceptional. Graves was quiet. She helped Whitfield, he said. She didn't take over. No, Sir. Torres Reyes agreed. She didn't. Why not, he asked, and it was a genuine question, not a trap. She clearly could have. She clearly saw the solution before he did. Most soldiers in her position, with her scores, would have taken the lead. It's human nature under pressure. Torres Reyes looked at him. I asked her that, she said, during the debrief. Graves's eyebrows rose slightly. What did she say? She said a sniper who fires too early doesn't just miss the target. She gives away her position and jeopardizes everyone depending on her. Torres Reyes picked up her pen again. Sir, whatever you think about her assignment here, that's not something you can teach someone. Either they understand it or they don't. Graves stood with that for a moment. Then he walked away without another word. He didn't go back to his office. I went instead to the base records room, and he asked for the file of a soldier named Colonel James Rourke, not a current file, a historical one, a career record, the kind of comprehensive document that the Army maintains on every officer through the duration of their service and preserves afterward. The clerk brought it out. Graves sat down with it at a table in the corner of the records room, which was not a glamorous space, but which was private and quiet, and he opened the file and began to read. He read for 2 hours. He read about a man whose career record described in the compressed bureaucratic language of military documentation, a sequence of assignments and decisions and outcomes that amounted to one of the most consequential service records in the Army's recent history. He read about the missions that were described obliquely because their full content remained classified. He read about the soldiers Rourke had trained and the testimonials that had been included in the file unusual, because career files didn't normally carry testimonials, but someone had clearly made deliberate decisions about what went into this one. He read about the last 18 months when James Rourke, already carrying injuries that a younger man might have recovered from more completely, had continued working, training, writing, preparing people for situations that only he had the experience to prepare them for. He read the medical summary of the final weeks, and then at the back of the file, he found something that stopped him cold. It was a letter, handwritten, on plain paper, not official Army stationery, personal stationery, the kind a man uses when he's writing something that he intends to be read by a specific person and not by the institution. It was addressed to whoever commands my daughter when she finally stops listening to me and enlists anyway. Graves sat very still. He read the letter. It was 4 pages long. It was written in the clear, direct, entirely unsentimental prose of a man who had spent 31 years saying difficult things plainly because plainness was the only language that actually worked when it mattered. It described Anna Rourke, her training, her capabilities, her particular strengths, the specific areas where she needed challenge rather than accommodation. It described what she had survived before she ever walked into a recruitment office. It described the philosophy behind her training and why that philosophy had produced results that might not fit the standard categories. And at the end, on the 4th page, in the slightly looser handwriting of a man who was writing something harder than the technical content that had preceded it, James Rourke had written, "She is going to walk in without my name," she insisted. "I taught her too well, and now I can't unlearn her of this particular lesson. She will be harder to categorize without the name. People will look at her scores and not know what to do with them because the scores won't match the story they've already written about who she is. I'm asking you, whoever you are, to look at her before you look at what you expect to see. She deserves that, not as my daughter, as a soldier. Give her the chance to show you who she is before you decide who she can't be. That's all I'm asking. She'll do the rest." Graves sat in the records room for a very long time after he finished reading. The evening light was different when he finally looked up. Several hours had passed without him noticing, which was something that hadn't happened to Lieutenant Colonel James Graves in a very long time, because Graves was the kind of man who always noticed time. He closed the file. He sat with his hands on the cover of it, I thought about the morning 3 days ago when he had pulled a new arrival out of a formation and used the full weight of his rank and his physical presence and his command authority to make a point that he had believed entirely and without reservation was necessary. He thought about the way he had used the word mistake in the context of what a young woman was doing in his army. He thought about what it felt like to be certain. He thought about 4 pages of handwriting on plain paper. He picked up the file and carried it to the front desk. "I need to make a copy of this," he said. The clerk nodded and took it. Graves stood at the desk and waited. And while he waited, he thought about something Torres Reyes had said. A sniper who fires too early doesn't just miss the target. She gives away her position and jeopardizes everyone depending on her. He thought about who had taught her that. I thought about what it meant that a man who had seen everything James Rourke had seen, done everything he had done, survived everything that file described. What it meant that that man had looked at his daughter and said, "The army isn't ready for you." Not that she wasn't ready for the army, that the army wasn't ready for her. The clerk returned with the copy. Graves took it. He folded it carefully. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he did something that nobody watching him would have predicted based on the man he had appeared to be 72 hours ago. He went to the administrative office and he asked for the scheduling log that documented the order to move the qualification trials from the standard 30-day timeline to 24 hours. He looked at the authorizing signature. He photographed it. Then he went to his office and he composed in the careful, precise language of a man who understood how institutional documentation worked and what it could and could not do, a formal communication to the Inspector General's office that confirmed the scheduling change had been irregular, identified the authorizing officer, and stated with the flat certainty of someone who had made a decision that he understood was irreversible, that the change had not been operationally justified. He sent it at 2200. He sat back in his chair. He had spent 30 years in the Army being certain about the important things. And sitting in his office at 2200 with a copy of a dead man's letter in his jacket pocket, Lieutenant Colonel James Graves confronted the possibility quietly without drama, without any of the performance that certainty usually comes wrapped in, that he had been certain about the wrong things. That the story he had believed about what Fort Bragg needed and who belonged there, and what the institution required to stay strong, that story had a gap in it. A gap the shape of a woman who had walked in without her father's name and outperformed everyone the institution had assumed she couldn't match. He didn't call anyone. He didn't announce the decision. He just sat with it in the quiet of his office, the way you sit with something when you know it's real and you know it's going to change things and you're not quite ready yet for the conversation that comes next. In Building 7, Anna Rourke lay on her bunk and stared at the springs above her. Torres was awake, then not asleep, quiet again. "Something happened today," Torres said. "Several things happened today," Anna said. "I mean something you're not saying." Anna was quiet. "Webb talked to you," Torres said. "After the trials, I saw her face when she came back to the barracks." "Webb doesn't have expressions, Rourke. Webb is a wall." "But she had an expression. So something happened." "I told her something I hadn't told anyone else," Anna said. "About yourself?" Torres asked. "About my father," Anna said. Torres was quiet for a moment. "Then is it the kind of thing that's going to change how people see you here?" Anna thought about this honestly. "It's going to change how some people see me," she said. "I don't know if it's going to change things the way I need them to change." "What do you need?" Torres asked. Anna closed her eyes. "I need to be seen," she said quietly, with the particular weight of someone who has spent a very long time being looked at without being seen. Not as his daughter, not as the experiment, not as the problem. I need someone at the top of this installation to look at me and see a soldier." The room was quiet. "What if they can't?" Torres asked. Anna opened her eyes. "Then I make it impossible for them not to," she said. Torres absorbed this. "Okay," she said finally, simply. And in the dark of Building 7, something settled. Not resolution, not yet. The story was nowhere near its end. There were still people in offices making calculations, still machinery in motion that Anna couldn't fully see, still the enormous, slow grinding weight of an institution that had been wrong about something for long enough that being wrong had become comfortable. But something had shifted. Not in the institution, not yet, in the people inside it. In Torres, who had started the week as a skeptic and was ending this particular night as something more complicated than that. In Webb, who had made a phone call the previous evening and was prepared to make another. In Graves, who was sitting alone in his office with a dead man's letter in his jacket, and the quiet, uncomfortable courage of a man beginning to understand that changing your mind when the evidence demands it is not weakness. It is the hardest thing there is. And somewhere in the base in a building Anna had never entered in an office she had no official access to, General Marcus Holt was reading the qualification results for the third time, still looking for the error, still certain there had to be one, but reading more slowly now, much more slowly. Because somewhere between the first reading and the third, a question had begun forming in the back of his mind that had nothing to do with scores or procedures or institutional precedent. A question that was simpler and more dangerous than any of those things. What if I'm wrong? He hadn't answered it yet, but the fact that he was asking it at all, that was the beginning of everything that came next. The week that General Holt had asked for did not move slowly. It detonated. 0600 Monday, 4 days after Anna Rourke had walked off the qualification trial with scores that nobody in Holt's office could explain away. The base was running its standard morning rhythm formations, PT, the organized, controlled chaos of thousands of soldiers moving through the first hour of a military day when the call came in that changed the shape of everything. It came to Webb first because Webb had made the right calls to the right people in the 48 hours since Anna had told her the name of her father. Webb had not broadcast what she knew. She had been precise and deliberate about who she told and in what order. The way a person is precise about the order in which they lay out the pieces of something that needs to be assembled, correctly or not at all. The call was from the Pentagon. Not from Okafor's office, though. Okafor was connected to it. From a level above Okafor. From an office that did not make routine calls to installation sergeants and whose direct contact with someone at Webb's rank meant that the people in that office had decided that the standard chain of communication was either too slow or too leaky for what they needed to say. Webb took the call in the hallway outside the barracks, standing with her back to the wall and her phone pressed to her ear and her face doing the thing it never did, which was show what she was feeling. "You're certain," the voice on the phone said, not a question, a verification. "Completely certain," Webb said, "and Holt doesn't know." "Not yet," Webb said, "but the week is moving. Someone is going to put it together." A pause on the line. "We need it to come from him," the voice said. "Not from us, not from the IG process. From him, voluntarily. Do you understand what I'm asking?" Webb understood. "You need him to arrive at it himself." "We need him to arrive at it himself," the voice confirmed. "Because if it comes from us, it becomes a political event. If it comes from him, it becomes something the institution can actually use." Webb looked at the wall across from her, at nothing in particular. "That's a narrow path," she said. "It's the only path," the voice said. "You have until end of week. After that, the IG process moves forward on its own timeline, and we lose control of the narrative." The call ended. Webb stood in the hallway for exactly 30 seconds. Then she went to find Anna. She found her in the weapons room. Of course she did. Anna's relationship with the weapons room had already become a running observation among the soldiers in Building 7. She went there the way other people went to the gym or the chapel, with a regularity that suggested it served some function beyond the purely practical. Webb understood this. It was the one place on the base where the variables were knowable, where the relationship between input and outcome was honest and direct. In a week full of invisible political machinery and institutional maneuvering and forces moving in directions, Anna couldn't fully see the weapons room was the one place where things were exactly what they appeared to be. "I need to talk to you," Webb said. Anna set down the cleaning cloth. "Tell me," she said. Webb told her. Not everything, not the source, not the specific office, not the details that would generate more questions than answers, but the shape of it, the timeline, the narrow path that the people above Webb's level were trying to walk, and what it required. Anna listened without interrupting. This was one of the things about her that Webb had cataloged in the past week. She did not interrupt. She held the full shape of information until it was complete before she responded to any part of it. Most people interrupted because they thought they knew where the sentence was going. Anna waited because she understood that the end of a sentence was sometimes the most important part. When Webb finished, Anna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "They need Holt to come to it on his own." "Yes," Webb said. "But they have a deadline," Anna said. "End of week," Webb said. Anna looked at the weapon in front of her. at the clean, simple geometry of a thing that worked exactly as designed. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, not helplessly, practically. The question of someone who was already thinking about the answer. "You're supposed to keep being exactly what you are," Webb said. "Visible, consistent, undeniable." She paused. "And there's one more thing." Anna looked at her. "Graves came to see me this morning," Webb said, "at 05:30, which means he didn't sleep much either." She let that land. "He found the file." Anna went very still. "My father's file," she said. "The letter at the back of it," Webb said. He read it. The weapons room was very quiet. "He didn't know I existed before this week," Anna said slowly. "He didn't know my father had a daughter in the army." "He knows now," Webb said. Anna absorbed this. You could watch it moving through her, not distress, not quite, but something adjacent. The particular weight of having something private become visible before you were ready for it. Her father's words, her father's handwriting, his deliberate and loving instructions to whoever commanded her those words in Graves's hands in this building, in this context. It was not what she had planned. She had planned to be seen through her performance, through the accumulated evidence of who she was not, through the advocacy of a dead man who had loved her. "What did Graves say to you?" she asked. "He said he owed you an apology," Webb said. Those were his exact words. "He sat in my office at 05:30, and he said, 'I owe Private Rourke an apology, and I don't know how to give it in a way that doesn't make it about me.'" Anna looked away. "That's a very self-aware thing for Graves to say," she said quietly. "It surprised me too," Webb admitted. A beat of silence. "What did you tell him?" Anna asked. "I told him to start by doing his job correctly," Webb said, "and to let her do hers." Anna nodded slowly. Something settled in her. Not relief, resolution. The particular quality of someone who has been carrying a weight in a specific direction for a long time and has just received confirmation that the direction is right even though the destination is still far. "Okay," she said. She picked up the cleaning cloth again. Webb stood up. "Rourke," she said. Anna looked up. "Your father wrote 4 pages, Webb said. Graves told me it took him 2 hours to read them, not because the words were complicated, because he had to stop and start, because it was," she searched for the word dense, not with information, with weight. She paused. "Whatever he wrote about you, it was the most honest thing anyone has written about a soldier in a long time." Anna's jaw moved slightly, a small controlled movement, the kind that happens when something hits a place that is still raw. "He was always honest," she said. Her voice was steady, just barely. Webb nodded once and left. Anna sat alone in the weapons room with the gun and the cleaning cloth, and 4 pages of her father's handwriting, loose somewhere in the world, now being read by people he had never met, doing the work he had intended them to do. She put her hands flat on the table and breathed, and then she went back to work. At 0900, Major Sloan made a mistake. It was the kind of mistake that happens when a man has committed himself to an outcome, and the outcome is slipping away from him, and he can feel it slipping, but he can't quite bring himself to stop pulling. Sloan had spent the weekend composing the narrative of the week in a way that still resolved where he needed it to resolve, and the narrative required one more data point, one demonstrable failure, one moment where Anna Rourke's performance cracked under specific conditions, something he could put on paper and carry to Holt and say, "Look, here it is, the thing I told you we'd find." He chose the sniper qualification. This was a restricted assessment, normally administered only to soldiers who had specifically requested assignment to reconnaissance or designated marksman roles. Standard processing soldiers did not sit the sniper qualification. There was no administrative reason to require it. But Sloan found a regulation rarely invoked sitting in the manual, like a piece of furniture that nobody had moved in years, that gave installation commanders discretionary authority to require additional qualification assessments for soldiers whose assignment profiles were under review. He applied it to Anna. He sent the order through processing at 0900, routed it through 2 administrative desks to create distance between his office and the instruction, and had the assessment scheduled for 1400 the same day. The sniper qualification at Fort Bragg was a 6-hour assessment. Administering it with 5 hours of preparation time was not technically a violation of any written rule. It was, however, the kind of thing that a person does when they are running out of legitimate options and have started making decisions from desperation rather than strategy. Webb found out at 10:30. She was in Graves's office when the notification came through, which was significant because it meant Graves found out at the same moment. Graves read the order. He read it again. Then he set it down on his desk very carefully, the way you set down something that you are trying not to react to physically. Sniper qualification, he said. His voice was entirely flat. Discretionary authority clause, Webb said. It's technically permitted. It's an ambush, Graves said. Diane. Webb said nothing. Graves stood up from his desk. He paced 2 steps toward the window and 2 steps back, which was the full distance available to him in that direction, and then he stopped. Who authorized this? Webb put the routing slip on his desk, the one that showed which administrative desks the order had passed through, the one that if you traced it backward with the knowledge of how those particular desks connected to which offices pointed unambiguously at Sloan. Graves looked at it. He's panicking, Graves said. Yes, Webb said. A panicking Sloan is a dangerous Sloan, Graves said. Not as an observation, as a problem that required a solution. The assessment is at 1400, Webb said. Graves looked at the clock on his wall, 3 hours and 30 minutes. Can she pass it, he asked. Webb looked at him directly. Graves, she said, just his name. With a particular quality, he understood what she wasn't saying. She can pass it, he said. She can pass it, Webb confirmed. He picked up the routing slip. He looked at Sloan's invisible fingerprints on it. Then he put it in his desk drawer and said, let it run, don't interfere. Don't tell her it was irregular. Let it run clean and let the results stand. Webb raised an eyebrow slightly. You're certain? If Sloan wants to give her another platform, Graves said, I'm not going to stop him. Webb left without another word. What happened at 1400 in the sniper qualification room with 2 assessors who had been given no context for why this particular soldier was there on this particular day was not a performance that either assessor was prepared for. The sniper qualification at Fort Bragg tested 6 specific competencies: range estimation, wind and environmental adjustment, concealment in movement, shot placement under time pressure, multi-target sequencing, and the final component, the one that ended careers more reliably than any other single element, sustained accuracy under evaluative stress. That last one was not primarily a physical test. It was a psychological one. The evaluator stood close, asked questions during the shot sequence, introduced unexpected variables, created the specific kind of pressure that separates the soldier who shoots well when conditions are ideal from the soldier who shoots well when everything is wrong. Anna shot well when everything was wrong. She shot well when the first evaluator moved into her peripheral vision at a distance that was technically outside the prohibited zone but was clearly intended to introduce distraction. She shot well when the second evaluator asked her mid-sequence to explain her wind adjustment calculations in real time. She shot well when they introduced a target substitution at the 4-minute mark that required her to recalibrate without being given time to recalibrate. She shot well because she had been taught to shoot well under these conditions specifically, because her father had known this test existed, because James Rourke, 31 years in the Army, had understood that the institution would test his daughter in every way available to it, and he had prepared her for every way he could anticipate, and the sniper qualification which he had administered himself during his years as a trainer was one he had anticipated. The results came through to Graves's office at 1700. He read them. He sat back in his chair. Then he called Sloan. The call lasted 4 minutes. Graves did most of the talking. He was quiet throughout, not the quiet of restraint, the quiet of precision, the way a person speaks when they are saying something that is going to matter, and they want every word to land exactly where it's aimed. He told Sloan that the IG documentation was already in motion. He told Sloan that his name was on a routing slip. He told Sloan that the correct decision at this point in the sequence of events was to stop, not to recalibrate, not to find a new approach, to stop completely and to consider with whatever clarity was available to him what he was actually doing and why. Sloan said very little. When the call ended, Graves sat in his office and thought about the week that had passed. 5 days since Anna Rourke had arrived. 5 days in which the machinery of resistance that he and Holt and Sloan had all been part of at different levels, with different degrees of deliberateness, but part of nonetheless had run up against something it couldn't process and had started malfunctioning in progressively more visible ways. He thought about the letter. He had read it 4 times now. He kept returning to one particular paragraph near the end of the 3rd page where James Rourke had written with the precise, clear-eyed honesty of a man who knew he was writing to strangers and had decided that clarity was more useful than diplomacy. The resistance you feel when you look at her file is not about her. It is about what her existence asks of you. It asks you to look at what you have protected and decide whether you protected it because it was right or because it was familiar. Those are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. And the moment you are honest about the difference is the moment you stop being an obstacle and start being the thing you signed up to be. Graves had underlined that paragraph. He didn't often underline things. He was thinking about it now in his office at 17:45 when his phone rang again. It was Holt. "Come to my office," Holt said, "now." The walk from Graves's office to Holt's office took 4 minutes at a normal pace. Graves covered it in 3, not because he was hurrying, because his stride was longer when he was thinking hard, and he was thinking very hard because the tone in Holt's voice was one he had not heard before. Not angry, not authoritative. Something else. Something that had the particular quality of a man standing at the edge of a decision he hadn't made yet. Holt's office was empty except for the 2 of them. Holt was standing, not sitting, which was significant. Holt sat at his desk the way monarchs sit on thrones, deliberately as a statement of position. Standing meant he didn't want the desk between them. Standing meant this was a different kind of conversation. On the desk, visible from the doorway, were 3 things: the qualification results, the IG correspondence, and a photograph. Graves looked at the photograph. It was a group photograph, military, formal, the kind taken at the conclusion of significant training programs. 20-something soldiers in the front rows and behind them standing slightly apart from the group. The way trainers always stand in these photographs, a man Graves recognized. James Rourke, young in the photograph, significantly younger, but unmistakable. And in the second row of soldiers, third from the left, a face that Graves had spent 5 days looking at across formations and assessment rooms, in the mess hall, in a weapons qualification room. Anna, younger too, 18, maybe 19, but the eyes the same, the stance the same, the particular quality of stillness the same. She trained with him, Holt said, not accusation, statement. She trained with him from childhood, Graves said. He had worked this out from the letter. He didn't wait for her to enlist. He trained her as soon as she showed aptitude, which was early. Holt looked at the photograph. "I knew James Rourke," Holt said, quietly. The quiet of memory, not management. Not well enough. He stopped, searched for the word. He was the kind of soldier that makes you feel like you've been doing the job with half the available effort. Not because he was aggressive about it, because he was just present, completely present, in a way that most people aren't capable of. Graves said nothing. "She has that," Holt said. "I've been watching the assessments, the evaluator reports." He was quiet for a moment. "She has exactly that." The office was silent. "Marcus," Graves said, the first name. Deliberate. Holt looked at him. "The IG process," Graves said carefully. "The scheduling adjustment. Sloane's actions. If this plays out through the formal process," he paused, "it becomes a different kind of story. It becomes institutional failure on record. It becomes the thing that defines this installation for the next decade." He held Holt's gaze. "There is another way this goes." Holt was very still. "You're asking me to get ahead of it," Holt said. "I'm asking you to decide what this installation stands for," Graves said, "before someone else decides for you." A long silence. Holt looked at the photograph, at the young woman in the second row, third from the left, at the man standing slightly apart from the group, looking at his soldiers with the focused, complete attention of a man who understood that the people in front of him were the most important work of his life. "What would James Rourke say?" Holt said very quietly. "If he could see what we've done this week." Graves didn't answer, because the answer was obvious. And Holt knew the answer. He was asking it not because he needed to hear it spoken, but because he needed to acknowledge out loud that he knew. "Get her," Holt said. Graves looked at him. "Get Private Rourke," Holt said. "Bring her here, now." At 18:20, Webb found Anna in Building 7, sitting on her bunk with her hands in her lap, and told her that General Holt wanted to see her in his office immediately. Torres above went very still. Garrett, who was 2 books over and had been pretending to read a technical manual, looked up. The barracks, which had been doing its evening noise, went quiet. Anna stood up. She straightened her uniform in 2 precise movements. "Now," she said. "Now," Webb said. And the look on Webb's face, the thing that Webb's face almost never did, was something that Anna read in the time it took to take a breath. Not warning, not concern, anticipation. Anna walked out of Building 7 and across the base toward Holt's office, and the walk was 4 minutes long, and she spent every one of those minutes doing what her father had taught her to do when the moment arrived that all the preparation had been preparing for. She breathed. Not to calm herself. She was not precisely afraid, but she was something that had no clean name. The feeling of a person standing at the hinge point of a thing the moment before a door opens, that is going to change what's on the other side of every subsequent door. She had been trained for this. She had prepared. She had walked into Fort Bragg knowing that the preparation and the performance and the patience were all moving toward a point where she would stand in front of the person who had thrown her file across a conference room and said, "Destroy her." And she would simply be herself. And that would have to be enough, or it would not be. And either way, she would know. She knocked on Holt's door at 1824. "Enter," Holt said. She opened the door. She stepped inside. She came to attention in front of his desk with the clean, correct posture of a soldier who has been trained not by necessity, but by understanding, and she looked at him directly. Holt looked at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Holt reached across his desk and picked up the photograph. He turned it to face her. Anna looked at herself at 18 years old, at her father. "You know what this is?" Holt said. "Yes, sir," she said. "Your father," Holt said. "Yes, sir." Holt set the photograph down. He looked at it for another moment. Then he looked back at her. "I owe you an apology," he said. The words landed in the room with the particular weight of words that have cost something. Not performed words, not institutional words. Words that a man had arrived at through 4 days of being wrong and the slow grinding courage that it takes to admit that. Anna said nothing. "I made a decision about you," Holt said. "Before I had any information about you, I made it based on what I expected to see and not on what was in front of me. And then I used my authority to make that decision harder to reverse than it should have been." He paused. "That is not the kind of officer I set out to be. And it is not," he stopped. "It is not what your father would have expected from someone at this level." The room was very quiet. Anna held his gaze. "Sir," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled, but not cold. The steadiness of someone who is feeling something significant and has chosen to feel it without letting it determine what happens next. "I didn't come here to be recognized as his daughter. I came here to be a soldier." "I know," Holt said. "I need you to see me as a soldier," she said. "Not a request, a requirement." "I know," Holt said again, and this time the word carried something different. The weight of a man who has arrived somewhere he didn't expect to arrive and is standing in the new place with the full awareness of how far it is from where he started. He stood up from behind his desk. It was a small movement, physical, but it changed the architecture of the room. He was no longer behind the desk. He was on the same side as everything else. "Private Rourke," he said, "I have read every assessment, every evaluator report, every result from every component of the qualification process." He paused. "You are the most complete soldier I have reviewed at the PFC level in 22 years of command authority." Anna looked at him. Something moved in her face, the smallest thing, the thing you can only see if you are watching very carefully and you know what you are looking for. The thing that looks, if you know her story, like 4 pages of a dead man's handwriting, finally doing the work they were written to do. "I want to assign you to the Reconnaissance Integration Program," Holt said. "Starting next week, full qualification track. I want you where your skills are actually being used." Anna was quiet for 1 full second. "Yes, sir," she said. Holt nodded. Then he did something that was not in any protocol, not in any standard procedure, not in any manual that governed the behavior of 4-star generals toward new arrivals at their installations. He extended his hand. Anna looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then she took it. They shook hands in the quiet of his office at 1826 on a Monday evening, and outside the window, a base was running its end-of-day rhythm. And in Building 7, Torres was sitting on her bunk, trying not to look at the door, and Garrett had stopped pretending to read. And Webb was standing in the corridor outside Holt's building with her phone in her hand, and a stillness in her posture That was the stillness of a person who has been in exactly the right place at exactly the right time and knows it. What nobody knew yet, not Holt, not Graves, not Webb, not the voice on the phone from the Pentagon, was that this moment, this handshake, this assignment was not the end of the story. It was the mechanism that triggered the part none of them had planned for. Because at 18:27, as Anna stepped out of Holt's office into the evening air, she checked her phone for the first time since morning. There was a message from a number she recognized, from someone who should not have had her number, who should not have known she was at Fort Bragg, who should not have known she existed. The message was 4 words. They found your father's records. And Anna stopped walking. In the middle of the path between Holt's building and the rest of the base, she stopped completely. Her face did something it had not done once in the entire week. Not fear, not quite, but the thing that lives right next to it. The thing that happens when the ground you thought was solid turns out to have something moving underneath it. The records her father had sealed, the ones that didn't appear in the career file that Graves had found in the records room. The ones that explained not just who James Rourke was in the official history of the Army, but what he had actually done, and who he had actually done it with, and why 14 months ago he had died in a hospital room in Virginia from injuries that the official record described in language so clinical, it bore no resemblance to the actual human cost of what had happened to him. Someone had found those records, and someone had told Anna about it, which meant that the week that had just ended the qualification trials, the assessments, Holt's apology, the handshake, all of it was not the story, it was the preface. The actual story was just beginning, and it was considerably more dangerous than anything that had happened so far. Anna stood on that path for exactly 11 seconds. She counted, not consciously, the way her father had trained her to count, automatically as a grounding mechanism, a way of keeping the mind anchored to real time when something hits hard enough to pull it loose from the present. 11 seconds. Then she put the phone in her pocket and kept walking. Not back to Building 7, not to Webb, not to anyone. She walked to the one place on Fort Bragg where she could think without being watched, without being evaluated, without the weight of other people's attention pressing on the outside of her while she tried to work through something on the inside. She walked to the small maintenance corridor behind the equipment storage building that she had found on day 2 during the 40 minutes of unstructured time between the evening meal and lights out, when she had done what she always did in a new place, mapped it, walked every available path, identified the spaces that were technically accessible but functionally invisible. Her father had taught her this too. Know your ground before you need it. Always need it. She sat with her back against the wall, and then she took out her phone again and she looked at the 4 words. They found your father's records. The number belonged to a man named Sergeant First Class David Kwan, retired, medically. 14 months ago, around the same time James Rourke had died in that hospital room in Virginia. Kwan had served with her father for 11 years across assignments that the official record listed only in the vaguest geographic terms, locations described as undisclosed operations, described as classified outcomes, described in language that told you nothing except that the people who wrote it had been very deliberately told to say as little as possible. Anna had not spoken to Kwan in 8 months. His medical retirement had been sudden. He had not explained it to her directly. He had sent one message 2 weeks after her father's memorial that said, only stay quiet, stay small, give it time. I'll reach out when it's safe. She had waited. 8 months of waiting. And now 4 words on a Tuesday evening, 30 minutes after the handshake that was supposed to be the beginning of something good. She called him. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he had been holding the phone. How much time do you have? He said instead of hello. Tell me, she said. He told her. It took 9 minutes. She did not interrupt once. What Kwan told her was this: James Rourke had not died from injuries sustained in the field. Not primarily. The injuries were real, they existed, they were documented in the medical record that Anna had read and wept over and memorized in the months after his death. But they were not the mechanism. The mechanism was something else, something that had been happening for the 18 months before his death, during the period when James Rourke had been doing the work that the official record described as training and mentoring and documentation, the quiet, unglamorous work of a senior officer at the end of a career. What he had actually been doing during those 18 months was building a record, not a career record, not the kind that goes in a file and gets preserved by the Army in a records room for future reference. A different kind of record. The kind that documents things that the institution does not want documented. The kind that a man builds when he has seen enough to understand that silence is no longer an option and that the truth, if it is going to survive, needs to be placed somewhere that survives him. James Rourke had spent 18 months documenting a pattern of decisions made at high levels of the Army's command structure. Specific decisions, specific people, specific outcomes that had resulted in soldiers dying in situations that the official record described as operational losses, but that James Rourke, with 31 years of experience and the particular clarity of a man who understood exactly how these things worked, from the inside knew were not operational losses. They were the result of choices, deliberate choices, made by people who had access to information that would have changed the outcome and who had either withheld it or acted on it in a way that served interests other than the lives of the soldiers in the field. And had documented 11 separate incidents. He had named names, and then 14 months ago he had died, and the documentation had disappeared. It didn't disappear, Quan said. His voice was careful, controlled. The voice of a man who had been living with something for 14 months and had learned to hold it without letting it hold him. He gave it to someone before he died. I don't know who. He wouldn't tell me. He said the fewer people who knew where it was, the safer it was, and the safer everyone connected to it would be. He told you it existed, Anna said. He told me it existed, Quan confirmed. And he told me that when the time was right, when someone was in a position to use it properly, he would make sure it was found. Anna was very still. He said when someone was in a position to use it properly, she repeated. Yes, Quan said. And you're telling me now, she said, tonight, 30 minutes after I received an assignment to the Reconnaissance Integration Program. A pause. Yes, Quan said. The maintenance corridor was very quiet. He planned this, Anna said. Not a question, not quite accusation, something between the two. The particular tone of someone who has just understood something enormous about a person they loved and is working through the simultaneous feelings of profound gratitude and profound anger that such an understanding produces. He planned all of it, the letter in the file, the timing of the assignment, the position I'd need to be in before the record surfaced. He planned what he could plan, Quan said. Your father was a precise man. He understood sequencing. He understood that certain information in the wrong hands at the wrong time gets buried again, gets used against the people trying to use it. He needed you to be somewhere, Anna, somewhere visible, somewhere that gave the documentation weight, somewhere with people around you who had already seen what you were. Anna pressed the phone harder against her ear. The people who found the record, she said. Who are they? Quan was quiet for a moment. That's the part you need to understand clearly, he said. They are not the people who want this information to come out. They are the people who want to make sure it never does. The 11 seconds she had counted on the path, the precise 11 seconds before she had kept walking. She understood now why her father had trained her to count, because sometimes the distance between the moment a threat becomes real and the moment it consumes you is exactly the length of time it takes to decide what to do with it. She had 11 seconds. She had already used them. I need to make 2 calls, she said. Anna, Quan started. I know, she said. I know what I'm doing. She hung up. She sat for 3 more seconds. Then she called Webb. Webb picked up in half a ring. I need to see you, Anna said. Not in the barracks, not in your office. Somewhere that isn't on a schedule or a log. A pause, just 1 second. Webb processing the tone of Anna's voice, which was controlled in a specific way that Webb had learned in 8 days to recognize as the control of someone who is managing something significant, not the ordinary calm of a person who has nothing to manage. Maintenance building, Webb said. 10 minutes. I'm already here, Anna said. Another pause. 5 minutes, Webb said. She arrived in 4. Anna told her everything. All of it. Quan, the records, the 11 incidents, the names, the 18 months of documentation that had disappeared with James Rourke and was now in the hands of people who wanted it to stay disappeared. Webb listened the way Webb always listened, with the complete gathered attention of someone who was building something in her mind as the words came in assembling structure and implication and consequence in real time, so that by the time the speaker finished talking, Webb was not just informed but already thinking 3 moves forward. When Anna finished, Webb was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "The Pentagon call I received Monday morning," she said. "Yes," Anna said. "They knew," Webb said. "The office that called me. They knew the records existed. They knew someone was looking for them." She worked through it. "They needed you in position, needed you visibly qualified, visibly supported, visibly inside the institutional structure before this surfaced. Because if it surfaces with you on the outside blocked, rejected the soldier that Holt tried to destroy, then it looks like the testimony of someone with a grievance. But if it surfaces with you inside the RIP, with Holt's handshake and Graves's formal support," she stopped. "Then it's the testimony of a soldier in good standing," Anna said, "backed by the assessment record of the most complete PFC in 22 years of command authority." She met Webb's eyes. He knew they'd say that. He knew Holt would say exactly that eventually. He knew because he'd served with men like Holt his entire career. He knew the arc of them. Webb looked at her. "Your father," she said slowly, "built a 40-year operation." "He built a 40-year operation," Anna confirmed, quietly. The maintenance quarter was cold. Neither of them acknowledged it. "What do you need from me?" Webb asked. "I need you to call the office that called you Monday," Anna said. "I need you to tell them the records have been found by the wrong people, and the timeline has moved up. Whatever they were planning to do with this, they need to do it now. Not end of week, now." Webb already had her phone out. "And the second call you needed to make," she said. Anna looked at her. "Graves," she said. Webb raised her eyebrows slightly. "He read my father's letter 4 times, Anna said. "He reported Sloan to the IG without being told to. He called Sloan and told him to stop before anyone asked him to." She paused. "He's already decided whose side he's on. He just hasn't been told what side that is yet." Webb nodded once. "Make your calls," she said. "I'll make mine." At 2100, Graves's phone rang. He was still in his office. He had not gone home, which had become a pattern this week that he recognized as significant men go home when the day feels finished, and no day this week had felt finished. He looked at the number. It was Anna. He picked up. "Sir," she said. "Private," he said. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need to tell you clearly so that you can make an informed decision about what you do next. Because what you do next is going to matter in a way that I don't have the authority to fully explain to you yet, but that you will understand completely within the next 24 hours. Graves sat forward in his chair. "Tell me," he said. She told him. The same version she had told Webb. Complete, unvarnished. The names, the incidents, the documentation, the people who had found it, and what they intended to do with it. When she finished, Graves was silent for 7 seconds. "Your father built this," he said, specifically. "Yes, sir. He built it knowing he might not survive to see it deployed," Graves said. "He knew exactly that," Anna said, "and he deployed it anyway." Another silence. "Private Rourke," Graves said. His voice had something in it that had not been there on Monday morning when he had stood in front of a formation and made a new arrival into a spectacle. Something that was the result of a week of being wrong and the specific difficult work of becoming less wrong in real time. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to be in Holt's office at 0700 tomorrow," she said, "with the letter, with your copy of the IG correspondence. And I need you to tell him everything I just told you before anyone else does. Because if it comes to him from outside, from the Pentagon, from the IG office, from the people who found my father's records, he will react the way people in his position always react to information that arrives as a threat, defensively, institutionally." She paused. "But if it comes from you, it comes as the truth, and Holt has spent this week slowly becoming someone who can hear the truth." Graves was quiet. "You're asking me to trust your read of a 4-star general you have known for 8 days, he said. "I'm asking you to trust your own read," she said. "You've known him for years. You told him he needed to decide what this installation stood for before someone else decided for him. You already know what he chose." A long pause. 0700, Graves said. 0700, Anna confirmed. She hung up. She sat in the maintenance corridor for 2 more minutes. Then she stood, straightened her uniform, and walked back to Building 7. Torres was awake. Garrett was there too, sitting on Torres's footlocker, which meant he had come from the next bay, and both of them had been waiting, which meant word had traveled, which it always did on a military base through the particular invisible network of observation and inference that thousands of people living in close proximity develop over time. Something happened, Torres said. Something is happening, Anna corrected. She sat on her bunk. It's not finished yet. Are you in trouble? Garrett asked. Anna looked at him. I'm in exactly the position I was supposed to be in, she said. According to a man who died 14 months ago and still managed to be right about everything. Garrett and Torres exchanged a look. Your father, Torres said. My father, Anna confirmed. Nobody asked anything more. There was a quality in the room in the way Torres settled back and Garrett stayed where he was, and the barracks held its particular nighttime quiet of people who understood that they were adjacent to something larger than the current moment, and who had made the collective unspoken decision that their role right now was to be present without adding to the weight of it. Anna lay back on her bunk. She looked at the springs above her. She thought about her father at 18 months before his death, sitting somewhere and writing. Not his memoir, not his vindication, a weapon, a carefully designed, precisely timed, completely deliberate weapon that he had built out of the one material that cannot be destroyed by the people it targets, the truth fully documented, placed in the hands of someone who could carry it to the right place at the right moment. He had given her everything. The training, the philosophy, the letter, the position, the sequence. He had given her the weapon and the mission and the path, and he had trusted her to walk it without him. She closed her eyes. At 0650 the next morning, Graves walked into Holt's outer office with the letter and the IG correspondence and everything else, and told the aide he needed 5 minutes before the general's day officially began. The aide, who had worked for Holt long enough to read the temperature of incoming conversations, looked at the folder in Graves' hand and said nothing and opened the inner office door. Holt looked up from his desk. Graves sat down across from him without being invited and opened the folder and began to talk. He talked for 22 minutes. Holt did not interrupt once. At 0730, Holt made a call, not to the Pentagon, not to the IG office, to Brigadier General Okafor. He told her what he knew. He told her what he intended to do with it. He told her that he needed her to be in his office at 1000 with whatever authority she had brought with her from Washington, because what happened at 1000 was going to require a level of institutional backing that he could not provide alone. Okafor said, I'll be there at 9:45. At 1000, Anna was called to Holt's office for the second time in less than 24 hours. This time, there were 5 people in the room when she arrived. Holt, Graves, Okafor, a man Anna did not recognize in civilian clothes, who carried himself with the specific, compressed authority of someone from an office that did not put its name on its door, and standing slightly to one side with his hands clasped in front of him, looking at Anna with the expression of a man who has carried something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told he can set it down, Sergeant First Class David Kwan. Anna stopped when she saw Kwan. For exactly 2 seconds, the control she had maintained for 9 straight days slipped entirely. Not broke, slipped. The way a mask slips when the person behind it sees something that gets past the mask before the mask can catch it. Kwan looked at her. He told me to give you this, Kwan said, when you were ready. He said I would know when. He held out an envelope. Plain, white, her name on the front in her father's handwriting. She crossed the room. She took the envelope. She held it. Nobody in the room spoke. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and on it, in the clean, direct prose of a man who had spent 31 years saying what he meant, James Rourke had written to his daughter one final time. She read it. The room was completely silent. When she finished, she folded the paper once and put it in her jacket pocket. Then she looked up. Okafor was watching her. Private Rourke, Okafor said, the documentation your father compiled has been recovered and secured. The people who accessed it did not have time to act on it. What happens next is going to require a soldier who can operate at the intersection of institutional authority and personal credibility. Someone whose record at this installation speaks for itself and whose connection to the original documentation is beyond question. She paused. Your father was very precise about what he wanted to happen, and he was very precise about who he wanted to carry it. Anna looked at her steadily. What do you need from me? Anna said. Okafor looked at Holt. Holt stood up from behind his desk. He walked around it. He walked to where Anna was standing, and he did something that was not in any protocol, not in any regulation, not in any manual that had ever governed the behavior of a 4-star general in his own office. He stopped in front of her, and he went to one knee. Not as theater, not as performance, as the physical acknowledgement of a man who had spent 9 days being wrong and had arrived through the specific and difficult work of honesty at the only gesture that matched the weight of what he owed her. Not as his daughter, as a soldier, as the person who had walked into the most hostile possible environment with nothing but what she had earned and had been precisely, completely, exactly what her father's letter had promised she would be. Graves went to one knee beside him, and the man in civilian clothes, the man from the unnamed office, went to one knee on the other side. Three men, three different kinds of authority, one knee each, in front of Private First Class Anna Rourke, who was 23 years old, who had been on Fort Bragg for 9 days, who had arrived without her father's name, who stood in the middle of Holt's office and felt the full weight of 9 days and 14 months and 31 years settle around her, like something that had always been there, that had always been coming, that her father had spent his entire life building toward this exact, unrepeatable moment. She did not cry. She was her father's daughter, and her father did not cry in moments like this. He had told her that tears were for after, for private, for the moments when the mission was complete and the weight could finally be set down. This was not that moment. This was the mission. She stood straight. She looked at the three men in front of her, and she said the only thing that the moment required, the only thing that her father, reading over her shoulder from wherever fathers go, would have recognized as the right response to 31 years of preparation and 9 days of proof and 4 pages of a letter that a dead man had written to the world on her behalf. "Get up," she said quietly, not with arrogance, with the authority of someone who has earned the right to use it. "We have work to do, ma'am." They got up, they went to work. And the story that General Marcus Holt had tried to end before it started, with a recruitment file thrown across a conference room and a command delivered in the voice of a man who had never been told no by anyone smaller than him, became instead the story that changed everything. The documentation that James Rourke had spent 18 months building was submitted through proper channels with Anna's formal testimony attached, supported by the assessment record of the most capable soldier Fort Bragg had processed in more than 2 decades, backed by the institutional authority of 3 men who had chosen each in his own way and at his own cost to be what they had signed up to be. The 11 incidents were investigated, the names were named, and Private First Class Anna Rourke, who had arrived at Fort Bragg without her father's name and without his protection and without anything except what he had given her, that no one could take away, went to work in the Reconnaissance Integration Program on a Tuesday morning and was precisely, completely, entirely herself, which was, as it turned out, exactly enough, more than enough. It was everything.